Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. It's Central Illinois and it's spring. So today it's 71 degrees and I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt with a picture of my dog Lakota on it. And, uh, earlier in the week when I walked in, it was 1 degree. So I'm really enjoying this warmer weather right now and hope you're all doing great wherever you're listening from. So we have a lot to cover today. We're going to talk about an update to the chaos strategy that the Democrats are employing. We're going to talk a lot about Pritzker and ways to attack his really horrible record. There's a lot of areas that I think that he can be called out on. I lumped them in about I have 6 different categories. I didn't really rank them in order. Probably we'll talk about that later. But the 6 areas that we're going to talk about are Second Amendment rights. He's really bad at that. Fraud, we see that going on. Energy policy is really pathetic. Spending is out of control. We know that. And the other thing is as a governor, he doesn't really care about the citizens, and it's really obvious by the way that he acts. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about safety. Safety is another issue that I think he's weak at. He's not done a very good job worrying about the crime rate, and some of the bills that he's passed haven't really made things any better. So that's kind of where we're going to go. I think what I'd like to start off with, and for those of you who are listening in, one of my favorite planes is the A-10. So we're going to, and the A-10 is providing really important support in the war in the Gulf right now. And it's going to be crucial to keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. It's a great plane for that. And let's start with the video of the plane here. And what you see here is an A-10 doing a strafing run. And unlike normal planes, it's a plane that's built around a 30 millimeter cannon, and it's capable of shooting 4,000 rounds in a minute. So that pretty much eliminates any target on the ground that it chooses to eliminate. So those fast boats that try and attack the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz won't last very long. They'll be at the bottom of the ocean pretty quickly. In addition, it carries an extremely large payload, so it can have, and you can see in the video if you see it, there's about 10 different ordnance that it can carry. And right now, the great thing about it is that they've come up with a very inexpensive rocket that's really good at shooting down drones. And finally, because of its capacity, it's able to loiter for a long period of time. So it just goes over the Gulf, just waiting for Iran to poke its head up and then blast the heck out of it. So it's really great, and I appreciate the pilots that fly those planes. They do a great job. And then the next thing we'll talk about is we'll move on to the chaos manner. And one of the things that we're seeing is that the Democrats are refusing to pass funding for DHS. And the reason that that's important is that, first of all, we're at war with Iran, so we need to have our homeland security as tight as possible, and that's not happening because they're not funded. Second of all, it's creating chaos at our airports because TSA is one of the organizations that's under the DHS umbrella, and we're seeing extreme long lines at airports. Some airports may have to close down because there's not enough. So let's see how NBC covers this. Sure, we turn on the sound. Uh, pardon, pardon me here. When I practiced this pre event here, the ad wasn't there, so sorry about that.
So we're not seeing it.
You're not seeing it.
We are still seeing your plane, and yeah, not hearing it or even the lovely commercial.
Huh. Well, let's see. Let's try. Let me try joining it. Try sharing it a different way.
Break travel week yet.
I'm all the way back and baggage claim.
With building frustration and long lines at key airports, including Austin, Atlanta, and LaGuardia. After missing a second paycheck, the TSA says 366 officers have now quit. Hundreds are calling out every day to work a second job to make ends meet.
This is a kitchen table issue. Sit at the table, speak to
Notice
the
how
TSA
it's the union
officers,
guy. They bring
find
out
out
the
from them
union
what's
guys
going on.
to
For some, it's potentially life and death.
I've heard from officers who cannot afford co-payments for cancer treatments or office visits for their sick children.
The airports with the highest call-out rates
and
include
also notice how
21%
it's
in
now a life
Atlanta,
and death issue
JFK,
because
and
of this
Houston Hobby,
guy's
16% in New Orleans,
for
14%
cancer
in
treatment.
Pittsburgh. When Republican Senator Cornyn showed up with burgers for TSA officers, Democratic Congressman Greg Casar was there.
Instead of bringing people burgers, he should bring them their paychecks.
On Truth Social, President Trump today said the crazed Democrats are not allowing TSA agents to get paid. Democrats have offered to fund TSA, but want
They've offered to fund TSA in exchange for basically eliminating the effectiveness of ICE and the ability to go after illegal aliens who are criminal in nature. So I think that's a bad trade. I don't think the Republicans want to do that. The other thing that the Democrats are doing to pretend that they're all in favor of opening these things up is they've broken out the various sub sectors of the DHS and allow them to be funded individually. So, for instance, TSA would have an individual bill, and some of the other areas of DHS as individual, FEMA for an individual bill. I think the Republicans should call their bluff on it and just have them fund TSA, because once TSA is funded, that's the biggest thing that your average person will see. The rest of these areas are a little bit hidden, so they won't really notice that they're not open at this time. So that takes away some of the leverage that the Democrats are using right now and trying to frustrate anybody who's trying to travel. It's interesting that they mentioned Hobby as one of the airports that's really bad. The last time I was in Houston, the Bush airport, there's two airports in Houston. One's a Bush airport and the other one is Hobby. And the last time Bush was a mess. And fortunately, I was flying out of Hobby. I got there an hour and a half early and there was absolutely no line at Hobby that time. So it's interesting how the different airports have different problems at different times. I wonder if that's coordinated or whether it's just random as to how it ends up working out. So interesting to see how that works. Well, we'll work on figuring out how do we get rid of Pritzker in the next election here. I think the way that we go about that is to systematically destroy his record, because his record is really one of failure, and it's extreme failure on levels that are really unheard of. For instance, when you look at the Second Amendment, as David pointed out last week, there's over 2 million people in the state that have guns and have their FOIA cards and whatnot. So what we're seeing here is Pritzker really hates guns, and he's doing everything possible to make it as hard as possible to own a gun. So just some of the things that he's gone about doing is, first of all, Illinois has the strictest regulation regarding guns control in the Midwest. Another way that he's hampering gun ownership is by slow walking FOID cards. It takes an extraordinarily long period of time for them to approve your FOID card so that you can buy a gun. And then when you do buy a gun, he's decided to tax the heck out of it. So he keeps increasing the tax on it. And he implemented a 3.75% tax, and now he's going to bring it up in this latest budget to over 5%. So all those things are negative if you're a gun owner. He's also created increased red flag rules. As you may know, red flag rules are rules that if somebody doesn't like you, they can call up and try and have your guns removed by the police. He's also having stricter reviews. He's limiting the types of guns that you can own. All these things are being, there's an extreme number of lawsuits that are out against that. So he's likely to lose these as time goes on. But first of all, they got to get through the Illinois Supreme Court, which is stacked against conservatives, and then it'll make its way to the Supreme Court. Some of the various lawsuits are against the assault weapons ban, the large capacity ban, and some of the FOID and concealed carry, which is unusual, is that we have to have strict limits on both of those. So between those two, that's really a pain. In addition, they're adding tax to the ammunition. So if you own a gun, you didn't escape the tax yet, because the next step is for you to, when you want to use your gun and use the ammunition in the gun, you're going to be stuck paying a tax on that as well, in addition to the sales tax that you already pay. He likes to call it a sin tax. So apparently owning a gun and shooting a gun is a sin in this state. I don't agree with that, but I think that's something that Bailey can take advantage of when time goes on. The next area that he's very vulnerable is fraud. There's a lot of fraud in the state. When you look at the state has been unable to pass an audit. So In 2023, they were unable to get their audit out for a couple of years, which violates pretty much every generally accepted accounting practice there is. And just so you know, the states have their own version. Businesses have one, and then states have another one. And that's supposed to make it easier for them to comply with the rules. And they're still failing. And in fact, the comptroller decided not to rerun for election in the Democrat Party because of all the shenanigans that goes on with that. In terms of fraud, we know that there was $5.2 billion of fraud that went through during COVID. It was through unemployment insurance was the fraud area there that caused that part of it. When you look at the fraud hotline, they're overwhelmed with calls. There's been 98 reports, 34 investigations, and 15 cases. So, when you look at that number of reports and only 15 cases, it makes you wonder whether they're actually concerned about fraud or whether they're just trying to tap it down as much as possible. Yeah, so the other part of the fraud and the risk that it has is that they're in violation, they're not complying with the federal rules. And so what that allows for is that there's risk of fraud across multiple agencies. And we've seen that with the SNAP issue. They refused to provide Washington with the SNAP list of recipients of SNAP that if they did that, it would allow the federal government to make sure that these people aren't getting multiple checks in different states, and the state of Illinois isn't checking those types of things. So all this money is flowing out throughout the system, but no one's really keeping track of it, and the usual checks and balances that most businesses have to prevent fraud aren't being implemented in this case. Here's our governor talking about that particular issue. Let me pull that up for you so you can hear what he has to say. He doesn't seem to be too concerned about tracking any of this stuff. He doesn't even know what his budget is.
It's almost there. You just have to share. Or the monitor with the plus.
Share a different way on there.
You're so close.
Governor Pritzker, how much does the state of Illinois spend on illegal immigration every year?
Again, illegal immigration, that's a federal responsibility. They could tell how much is wasted as a result of their failures.
Governor, don't you keep track of how many people are on your Medicaid rolls, how many people who are illegal immigrants in the state of Illinois who are getting actually benefits in your state? Doesn't your government keep track of that?
They don't get Medicaid in Illinois or any state as far as I know.
Governor Pritzker, you do not keep track of any public service dollars in the state of Illinois that goes to illegal immigrants or goes to people in your state who are not legal residents of the United States and of the state of Illinois? You don't keep track of that.
We absolutely keep track of our budget. We're very closely, and in fact, it's been balanced for 7 years in a row, unlike the Republican.
Legal immigrants in the state of Illinois who are getting actually benefits.
Obviously, that's a lie, because if you were keeping track of the money that you're spending, you obviously would be able to pass an audit and not have audits linger on for years at a time. 180 days is the standard and is the rule of thumb that you should be able to pass them. The 2023 audit took more than 2 years to go through, and the 24 audit apparently hasn't even been completed yet. So we're talking about gross incompetence, and he's standing in front of Congress just acting like no big deal, I don't know anything. Meanwhile, what I did find out is that he has a special program called the Health Benefits for Immigrant Adults that he uses to pay out money. And it was a project that was costing so much money that he's decided to reduce that. So he's saving in this year's budget $330 million that was previously going to non-citizens in the state. But on the other hand, he's also still remaining. He's going to still have the health benefits for immigrant seniors, which is costing us still $110 million. On top of that, some of that money that is obviously being used for non-citizens is being rerouted through other programs. So that money isn't completely going away. It's being reallocated to other programs so that you don't realize that we're spending money on people who are non-citizens in this state. So as you can see, he doesn't really care about that. And that's one of the issues that I find that's really annoying, and is something that I think we can run on, is that we know that he doesn't really care. So I don't know if you noted, well, of course, a lot of you are listening, so you didn't see this, but the person interviewing him also pointed out that there were 54 people shot in Chicago the weekend before that he gave that performance, or whatever you want to call it, testimony. He really just doesn't care that people are being shot down in Chicago every weekend. He also doesn't care really about being governor of the state. His real goal is to become the presidential candidate for the Democrat Party. So why do we want a part-time governor who's already failing? And how much more is he going to fail when it comes down to not even being in the state when he's running for president throughout the United States? And then, of course, being a billionaire. Now, I don't typically want to criticize people solely for being a billionaire, but as a billionaire, he really has lost touch with the common man. The average citizen in Illinois doesn't have $1 billion. So for them, some of these programs and taxes and increases, they have an impact. Where when you're Pritzker and you're a billionaire, does it really matter to you that you pay an extra 10, 20 cents a gallon because you have an Illinois state tax on that? So when you look at that, you can tell that he's not much of a caring type person. He doesn't have that smarmy kind of feel that Bill Clinton had, where, I feel your pain, and with that Southern drawl. So he's definitely vulnerable on that issue as well. It's not because he's rich, it's because he's out of touch. So that, those are a couple of the things. And then when you look at when you look at spending is another area that he's very vulnerable on. When you look at his tenure as governor, the budget's gone from $40 billion to $55 billion over that time period, which adds to about a 5.4% increase. And during that time, when you compare that to, so overall, that's a 37% increase. When you compare that to the inflation index is 23%. He's definitely been very good at spending a lot of money. And where does that money come from? It comes from your pocket. During his tenure, he's increased taxes, which is another area where I think he's vulnerable at, is he's increased 24 different taxes, and it's cost Illinoisans over $5.2 billion. That's a lot of money, except if you're Pritzker. It goes from everything, anything is taxable as far as he's concerned. So when you look down the list of things that he's increased taxes on, cigarettes, communication taxes on your phone. If you want to do some sports betting, we got the NCAA tournament kicking off. You want to put some bets on that? Well, Pritzker's in your pocket for that as well. You got, of course, legalizing cannabis was supposed to be this great shakes and raise a lot of money so we wouldn't have to all pay up in other ways. But that was just a small portion of the increase of spending that he's come up with. Property taxes are the highest in the country. When you look at our tax burden, you see that when you see the tax burden, we're the seventh worst overall in the country. So there's only 6 other states that are worse than Illinois when it comes to taxation. And, we're 6th overall in terms of property taxes. And what's actually a little frightening is that we have such a high tax rate, but despite this high tax rate, it's not enough. And what that means is that despite all that money coming in, we are so in debt that we're the last when it comes to financial stability in our state. We have the worst credit rating of any state in the union. So, and you can't, when you're already at one of the highest tax rates in the country, you can't just go ahead and say, oh, well, I'll just raise taxes some more so that I can afford to pay all these bills. So the real solution has to be cutting spending. Otherwise, we'll never catch up. The other thing in terms of the spending issues is he likes to brag, and he bragged in that testimony that he was balancing the budget. Oh, I've balanced the budget, unlike what Trump does. So he wants to make this an election against Trump. And he's going to blame Trump for not giving Illinois as much money. But Illinois has dug their own hole by not following the federal rules. And when you don't follow the federal rules, you don't get the federal money. So it's not like you can just demand money, and despite the fact that Pritzker thinks he can. And so that's led to this issue where the state has to come up with a lot more money because they refuse to follow the federal policies. And the other way that the budget was balanced is a lot of gimmicks. So he also likes to brag that he's got this rainy day fund in case we need extra money. Well, what the rainy day fund is just taking money from next year and spending it this year and claiming that you have extra money. So he plays a lot of games with money that goes in between different agencies and different areas of the government. and then pretends that that added money to the budget, which it really didn't. It's just money that has to be paid later. And then next year, he'll come up with a different set of cash flows that don't count for this year, but you'll pull them in from the next year. And so they constantly do that and use that as a way to balance the budget. On the other hand, do we know that the budget ever was balanced? Because we haven't passed the audit. So maybe we spent a lot more than we actually pulled in, and we don't even know it because our accounting is so messed up that we can't even tell what we have. So all those things are, things where I think he's vulnerable if we point them out. The issue here is if you think that the mainstream media on the national level is bad, you should see the Illinois media. They talk about a propaganda piece for Pritzker and the Democrat Party. They refuse to even talk about these issues or report on them. So the only way you can find them is you have to really dig and dig and dig. And you almost have to show up to some of the hearings just to find out what's really going on. And there's just a limited number of organizations that are willing to report on these types of issues. Illinois policy is probably the number one area that is reporting on these types of issues. And I would recommend that you follow them as well. In addition, I'm going to plug our show here. Make sure that you are following us we're in Facebook, we're on X. You can watch the show on Rumble and YouTube, and you need to just put in, make sure you do use the @ and then the DPB show, and you'll find us on those platforms. So make sure you're following us and listening. So, those are a couple of the areas. Now, there's some areas that are even more concerning than the fraud, believe it or not. The next one is our energy policy. The energy policy that Pritzker has implemented is catastrophic. It's on its way to making us have an I lived in California for 8 years, and during that time period, and this was 20 years ago, California was already going through rolling brownouts because they didn't have enough power and not enough transmission service to be able to move the power around to where it needed to be. Illinois is on the verge of that, and the reason for that is a law that he passed, and it's called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. Now, it didn't create any jobs, and I don't know, maybe it's equitable to have everybody go without power and everybody pay a whole lot for their power, but it's not good policy overall. I've got a video here I'm going to bring up, and I'll share it with everybody. Let me share this with you, and you can listen to just how bad this policy has been.
Illinois has lost 6,000 megawatts of reliable 24-hour power. That's the equivalent of 3 nuclear power plants or enough power to power 1 million homes in this state. Gone. Under your guys' leadership, here we are, $8 billion in rate increases on the people of the state of Illinois. $8 billion. Who can afford to live here? You have a study on a bill that didn't exist when the study was done. Why? Because the bill wasn't filed till Tuesday. Who believes you? Nobody in reality, they do believe their power bill because they get it every month. They do know when it's done every month, and you're taking the caps off. Katie, bar the door. Here they come. You want some more facts since we're dealing with facts? 2019, electricity was 8.6 cents per kilowatt. In the summer of this year, it was 23. That's triple. Under the leadership of Governor Pritzker and the supermajority Democrats in this state who keep telling us, oh, we're here to help, little guy. We care. We care about you, little guy. We're going to make sure your power bills go down. 2021 to 2025, you can see this nice little green line here. That's the rise and increase. Here's a great one. How do we compare to our neighbors? The average price in Illinois residential is 18.09 cents per kilowatt. In Kentucky, it's 13.4 cents per kilowatt. We're higher than Indiana. We're higher than Iowa. We're higher than Missouri. We were right there with Wisconsin, but after this passes, it'll be a trifecta. You'll have the whole deal. We will be the highest energy costs in the entire Midwest. Congratulations.
So we know that that's happening today. The question is, how bad is it going to get? And we can tell in advance that it's going to get even worse. And the reason we know it's going to get worse is because the way that the law has been passed and set up is to eliminate all coal by, here it is. We're doing all coal by 2030 by all public utilities. And we're also going to have all coal from municipalities by 2040. So what you know is that what we've seen is that right now, 15% of the energy is produced by coal in this state. So what that means is they're going to close another 15% of these coal plants in the next 5 to 10 years. And why it costs you more money is because coal runs whether it's windy or whether it's sunny. So you always have coal power plants. The issue with wind and solar is they're intermittent, which is why you now have the battery tax on your bill, because in order to have enough energy during these low periods for the intermittent energy producers, we have to have batteries to store it, because otherwise what happens is you have to go out in the open market, and the wind doesn't just blow in Illinois, it blows in Iowa, it blows in Indiana, and when it doesn't blow in any of those states either. And so everybody is short of energy, and so when Illinois has to go out in the market and pick up extra energy because they don't have enough, they pay at the highest possible rates, because that's what you have to pay to get it to fund the energy. The other reason that that's going to cost you a lot more money is because the way that utility companies get paid is they get paid a rate of return on their investment. And so every time they go out and build one of these wind farms or a solar farm, they go to the state regulator and say, hey, we just added this, so we need to increase our rates for all of our citizens so that we can keep our rate of return where it needs to be. And what that's come down to is that, for instance, the transmission costs for NICOR are up 135% during Pritzker's administration, and Ameren is up 70% during that period of time. The wholesale is expensive, and to give you an idea of how expensive this wholesale, it's called wholesale when you buy when you go out in the open market and buy extra energy to put on your grid. And it can cost, at peak levels, it can cost 2,100% more than average. So that's why Pritzker is throwing a fit. Now, if you consider that over the next 10 years, we're going to eliminate another 15% of the coal plants and have to add another 15% to the intermittent power, you know that along with that is you're going to have an equal amount of extra battery storage so that you'll be able to take care of that. And to make matters worse, he wants to get rid of natural gas plants as well, because they produce carbon as well. So when you look at that, natural gas is another 17%. So now we're talking about 30% of the power system that they're trying to replace with intermittent. It's not going to work. And then they want to encourage people to build data centers here, and they're not planning for them. So how is that going to work out for our electric grid? That's probably the most concerning area to me of all the areas that we could be talking about. Is our power system, our electric grid is just going to be a mess. And it's all because of Pritzker and his laws that he's passed, and the Democrats in the legislature. So let's take a look here at how well they're planning these. I'm going to show you where they're planning for the or lack of planning for the data centers. Let me share this with you. Tanya, can you tell me when I get this up whether it's playing for the audience?
People to watch the Joliet's city council chambers filled to capacity. They've even set up several overflow areas for people to watch the proceedings, mostly folks who are opposed to a new data center in town. This is where developers propose building the largest data center in the state. It's about 800 acres of mostly farmland near the Joliet Speedway, an ideal site, according to developers, for what they're calling the Joliet Technology Center. Many of the residents spoke against the center, urging city councilors to reject it, one presenting nearly 5,000 petition signatures against it. They cite environmental concerns about water and electricity usage and noise generated by the plant. All issues, they say, that convinced several other Chicago area communities to reject data centers.
I am all for.
So here's what you've got. You've got the largest data center in the state of Illinois going in. Meanwhile, we're closing the power plants that can provide them with power 24/7. How does that make any sense whatsoever? How's that going to work? We're already being forced to go out into the open market and basically be robbed to provide enough electricity to keep our power grid going. So how is that going to work? I mean, it's not, obviously, and we need to do something about it. We need to get this guy out of there before we all end up being like Cuba down there, where we only have power a few hours a day. And who wants to live in that kind of scenario? You know, living in a third world country. So that's the energy policy. It's a mess. There's nothing that Pritzker can say that's good about it. He's just made a mess. In addition to that, who knows how much, we already have one former politician in jail for his work with the utility companies, and the utility companies are being forced to pay back money regarding that fraud. Who knows how much the fraud is going on with this Illinois Commerce Commission. So that was another little sleight of hand business. So it got to be that the commission was just a rubber stamp for every policy that the electric companies brought up to them. And they were kind of embarrassed by how much they were approving. So part of what they did is because they needed these batteries, they made the batteries as a different part. So it doesn't show up under the same transmission bill that you have. And so they're pretending that it's a different scenario. It's not, plant and equipment that they're adding batteries. Well, when you're an electric company, batteries are plant and equipment. So they're lying to you again, and they're pretending that, oh, our commission isn't just a rubber stamp. We didn't approve everything they wanted. We didn't approve the batteries. Well, you did, because you made them part of the bill later on in a different category. That's not fooling anybody. So we need to really focus on that energy issue, and everybody gets a bill, so everybody's impacted. So that's one that ought to be something that you can really run on. And Pritzker doesn't have anything that he can fall back on and say as a counter argument to the disaster that is Illinois power. And then the final area where he just doesn't care about, and we saw that earlier, is in terms of your safety in this state. When you look at some of the laws that were passed, the Safety Act wasn't anything about being safe. What it did was it allowed people to be out on bail without eliminated bail for people, so that when they committed crimes, they wouldn't have to come up with money so that they could be free instead of waiting in jail for their trial to occur. The claim is that it didn't really have a major impact on crime in the state, but that would assume that we're actually tracking crime properly and that all crimes get reported. One of the issues in the state of Illinois is that we're having trouble attracting people to be police officers, and so they're underfunded and understaffed. What that means is that if there's a crime, it doesn't always get reported because there isn't a police officer for the crime to be reported to. Second of all, when you look at some of the issues in terms of the response, when you look at 911 calls in Chicago, half the calls go unanswered. So can you really be sure that all the crimes are really being reported and that this policy actually has made the state any safer? And, then when you add on to that, the idea that Pritzker is not really interested in working with ICE, and ICE is trying to deport illegal aliens who have criminal records, it clearly means that we're not any safer under a Pritzker administration. The other area that he's failing on is he's giving illegal aliens commercial driver's license. And when you can't read English and you can't speak English, it's pretty hard to follow the rules of the road that are signs in English. And we've seen numerous cases where these drivers are unable to do a sufficient job and have killed people in the process. So when you look at those issues, none of those speak well to the safety of the citizens in the state of Illinois. And in fact, they say the opposite. So all those things are places where I think that Pritzker is vulnerable. he's going to play the 3-card Monty and try and pretend that none of these things exist, but we all know that they're happening, and we need to make sure that he doesn't get elected so that we can start improving our state and getting our fiscal house in order, get our energy policy in order, preserve our Second Amendment rights. All these things are important to most people in the state, and it's going to be very hard for him to argue that he's done anything in favor of that. So what he's going to do is he's going to pretend that he's running against Trump, and he's going to blame all of the state's woes on Trump. And the Bailey campaign needs to recognize that and start taking steps as soon as possible. They also need to realize that they're going to get no help from any of the press. So everything has to be done through social media and through any of their campaign messages that they are able to spend on. And unfortunately, Pritzker, being a billionaire, he's going to put in a lot of money into this campaign himself, and he's going to overwhelm the system with ads that are going to be basically lies. And it's going to be up to the Daily or Bailey campaign to make sure that all those lies are brought to light for the average citizen. And hopefully, the other area that I think that, and David points this out quite a bit, is if we can just get the same kind of turnout that we had and the same number of voters that we had for Trump during the presidential election in this election, that we should be able to do pretty good. So it's going to be up to the Republican Party and the Bailey campaign to make sure that they get some door knockers. And the good news is that it's 40 days and 40 nights of voting in the state of Illinois. So there's plenty of time to see who's voted and to make sure that the people that are in your party have voted and taken care of business. And so what that means too is that as a voter, number one, what you need to be doing is get your vote in early. By getting your vote in early, that means that the campaign doesn't have to worry about going and knocking on your door and making sure that you vote. Number two, volunteer where you can. We can't be summer patriots where we only come out when it's nice. We have to go out and get those votes and help the campaign as much as we can, and be part of the process. So those are really the ideas that I see as the way to promote Bailey and to get him across the finish line this time around. I think the extra term that Pritzker has had has definitely showed what a failure he is as a governor, and it's obvious, and it just needs to be pointed out, because he'll pretend. He's very good at pretending that none of it really applies to him, but clearly it does. So hopefully that gives you some ideas to think about. Yeah, well, I see that he's not going to make it as president. Well, hopefully he doesn't make it as president. I wouldn't be so confident that he won't make it as nominee. The Democrat Party has a pretty weak bench. So when you look at Newsom, and Kamala will probably run again, and so you've got some senators who have some vanity projects to run, and I think Chris Murphy is one who's running. So they have a pretty weak bench. So it wouldn't take much for Pritzker to be able to make it to the top of the. He'd be maybe the best house in a bad neighborhood kind of situation. So I wouldn't put it past him to actually be able to win. And then of course there'll be some somebody who just pops up out of nowhere, somebody like a Clinton or Obama who no one's ever heard of, that all of a sudden decides to run and get some traction for whatever socialist behavior that he promotes, that the Democrat Party always loves. You know, a Bernie Sanders type, maybe Mondami will run. Who knows? All these people, you know, that everybody seems to have these delusions of grandeur and want to run for president. So hopefully that's a good summation of what we need to be concentrating on for the run for governor. And next week we'll have David back, and we'll see what comes up over the weekend and what kind of topics we want to cover on Tuesday. So I appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll see you again next Tuesday.